What if Atlantis never sank? What if the greatest empire of humanity still stood today, its towers rising over the horizon, its navy ruling the oceans, its knowledge shaping the course of history? Close your eyes and picture a city of perfect circles, cut into the earth like ripples frozen in stone. Canals run through the rings, carrying ships from the heart of the city to the open sea. Bridges of marble span the water, their arches glowing in the Sunday golden temples reach upward, their walls heavy with carvings of gods and kings. At the very centre, a vast palace of crystal and bronze dominates the skyline, a throne from which rulers looked out across the endless ocean. Plato, the philosopher of Athens, told this story more than 2,000 years ago. He described a land larger than Libya and Asia combined, a place blessed with every resource. Its mountains held silver and gold, its forests offered timber for fleets, its fields produced harvest after harvest without fail. Its people were bold, skilled, and ambitious. They built ships by the thousands, they sent armies across continents, they claimed dominion over lands near and far. But Plato also spoke of their downfall. In a single day and night, disaster struck. The seas rose, the earth shook, and Atlantis sank beneath the waves. The empire that had once stretched across the known world disappeared without a trace. Still, the memory never died. Explorers in the age of sail drew maps filled with phantom islands. Sailors whispered of ruins below the water. In the 20th century, expeditions searched the Caribbean. Submarines scanned the Mediterranean. Even the CIA examined reports, wondering if Atlantis had been more than a myth. Now consider this. What if the island never disappeared? What if the canals still flowed with ships, the temples still stood in sunlight, and the libraries still preserved knowledge, beyond our reach? In that world, the word superpower would carry a different meaning. America, Russia, and China might never have become the great powers we know today. Instead, the role of the dominant empire could have belonged to Atlantis, standing above all others as the true center of the world. Because if Atlantis never sank, there would be only one empire, one name carried across every shore: Atlantis. And to understand why, we must go back to where the legend first began, to the place it was said to stand. Now picture the sea stretching endlessly before you, waves rolling toward horizons no one had yet crossed. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Atlantis was said to rise. Some placed it beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, past the Pillars of Hercules, where the Atlantic opens wide. Others believed it lay in the Caribbean, near the great stones of the Bimini Road. Some pointed to Santorini, shattered by volcanic fire, where the Minoan world was destroyed, and still others whispered of Antarctica, shown strangely free of ice on the ancient Piri Reis map. Each theory tries to place Atlantis on a map. Wherever it stood, Atlantis was imagined as more than a city. It was the world's first true capital, a seat of power that commanded seas, reached across continents, and stood as the axis of the world before the word empire was ever spoken. If such a capital had endured, Egypt would never have worn the crown of Africa's greatest civilization. The pyramids at Giza, massive as they are, could have been smaller reflections of monuments built long before in Atlantis. Blocks of stone moved by sheer human strength in Egypt might once have been moved by technologies forgotten in Atlantis. The pharaoh may have ruled the Nile, but his throne could have stood under the watchful eye of Atlantean governors. Egypt, in that vision, was not the beginning of civilization, but an inheritance, perhaps even a colony of a power far older. Now imagine the Greeks. We call Athens the cradle of philosophy. We honor Aristotle as a mind who shaped the world. But what if even he was a student of something older? Imagine a library in Atlantis, vast and glowing, where scrolls and crystals preserved wisdom of the stars, mathematics of impossible precision, and insights into the human soul. Imagine fragments of that knowledge surviving the fall, carried into Greece, where they seeded the ideas we now call the foundation of the West. In that case, philosophy itself would not be Greek. It would be Atlantean, and Rome, the empire of legions, of iron discipline, of law. They marched across continents and crowned themselves masters of the Mediterranean. Yet if Atlantis still ruled the seas, Rome's power would have been broken before it began. Roman soldiers could hold the land, but the waters would belong to Atlantis. Every trade route, every harbour, every coastline would already have been claimed. Rome may have risen as a regional power, but its armies would have marched always in the shadow of an empire greater than their own. If this were true, the history of the Mediterranean would not be Greek or Roman. Its story would have been written by Atlantis. Its ships would have ruled from the Pillars of Hercules to the distant Caribbean. Its monuments would have dwarfed the pyramids. Its wisdom would have outshone the libraries of Alexandria, and its flag, whatever it may have been, would have flown above every coast the sea could touch. Picture that for a moment. A world where the empires we know as great, Egypt, Greece, Rome, were never the centres of history, but only provinces in a world dominated by Atlantis. The names that fill our textbooks might have been remembered differently. The stories we tell of pharaohs, philosophers, and Caesars might instead have been chapters in the long reign of a single empire. And perhaps this was only the surface. The true legacy of Atlantis may not lie in empire at all, but in technology far beyond its time. Stay with us, and together we will uncover the secrets said to have powered a civilization like no other. The legends of Atlantis speak not only of wealth and power, but of technology beyond its age. Ancient writers described a metal called orichalcum, second only to gold, gleaming like fire when struck by the sunday. The temples of Atlantis were said to be covered with it, their walls shimmering as though alive. Some tales go further. They speak of weapons that use sound itself, vibrations so powerful they could shake foundations or break walls at a distance. Even the design of their buildings hints at mastery. Structures were said to be built to resist earthquakes, their foundations bending with the earth instead of breaking. But what if these fragments are only shadows of something far greater? Imagine a civilization that drew energy not from wood or coal, but from the earth itself. Crystals set in towers, capturing invisible forces. Fields of power humming through the air, delivering free energy without fire, without smoke, without end. Imagine ships lifted not by sails or oars, but by forces we would call anti-gravity, skimming the seas, or even the skies, with no need for fuel. And what of medicine? What if health was not managed with knife and herb, but with resonance and light? Crystals tuned to the body, restoring balance, accelerating healing, perhaps even extending life itself. The elders of Atlantis, it is said, lived far longer than ordinary men, their strength preserved by knowledge we have long since lost. Think of what that would mean. If humanity had inherited such science, the Industrial Revolution would not have begun in the 18th century. It might have begun 5,000 years ago. Steam and steel could have risen in the age of the pharaohs. Flight might have crossed the skies in the time of Rome. By the Middle Ages, ships could already have sailed the stars. Our modern world of engines, electricity, and satellites might seem not like progress, but like rediscovery, echoes of inventions that once filled the streets of Atlantis. And if this vision were true, no empire could rival it. Not Greece, not Rome, not any of the superpowers we know today. Atlantis, with its mastery of energy, medicine, and the very laws of nature, would have stood apart. A civilization untouchable, centuries ahead of its time. But Atlantis, some say, held not only science and power, it may also have reached into the deeper realms of spirit and the mind. The stories of Atlantis often speak of gods. Poseidon, lord of the sea, said to have claimed the island for his own. Zeus, ruler of Olympus, remembered in myths of thunder and judgment. But what if these were not gods at all, but memories? Memories of Atlantean kings, their power so great, their presence so vast, that later generations could only describe them as divine. Imagine schools where learning was not only of numbers or stone, but of the spirit. Halls where students practiced deep meditation, reaching states of mind we barely understand today. They may have believed that sound itself could bridge the gap between man and the cosmos, chants and tones carrying thought into the stars. In this vision, crystals were not only tools of energy, but vessels of consciousness. The Atlanteans may have believed they held the key to immortality, not immortality of the body, but of the soul. To them, death was not an ending, only a passage. When the waves rose and the earth shook, the city itself may have been lost, Yet in their belief, the spirit endured. The soul vibrated with the universe, moving beyond the reach of flood or fire. Pause here and consider what this means. A civilization that mastered both science and spirit. A people who saw no line between technology and faith, between energy and soul. Their temples may have glowed not only with fire, but with voices tuned to the harmony of the cosmos. Their rulers may have governed not only with power, but with visions of eternity. And if Atlantis truly still stood, then human society today would not look the same. Our religions, our philosophies, our very idea of life and death could be entirely different. Because Atlantis was not only a city, it was a way of being. But if such a society had endured, then the world we live in now, the world of nations and borders and powers, would not exist as we know it. The story of humanity would have unfolded very differently. The inventions we call modern might have been ancient. Imagine flight 2,000 years in the past, machines of air and sky lifting men, long before the Wright brothers ever dreamed of wings. Picture the streets of Rome, not lit by torches, but by electricity, power flowing through wires while Caesar still reigned. By the Middle Ages, ships of crystal and fire might already have carried us into space, leaving the Earth, while castles still crowned Europe's hills. And in our own age, perhaps there would be no smartphones at all, but living holograms of crystal, projecting thought and voice instantly across oceans. In such a world, the word empire might carry no meaning. War might have been forgotten. History would not be divided into the rise and fall of nations, but written as one continuous story under Atlantis. Progress would not have come through rivalry, but through guidance, flowing outward from a single source of power. Picture the moment mankind first set foot on the moon. In our history, a flag was planted in the dust. In the world of Atlantis, perhaps it would not have been a flag at all, but a crystal, glowing under the silent sky, a symbol of a power that never fell. The milestones we celebrate today, industry, electricity, space, communication, would not belong to separate nations but to Atlantis alone. But what of humanity itself? What would we have become if Atlantis had never fallen? Perhaps our societies would not be truly ours at all, but hybrids, a blending of Atlantean blood and human blood, two lineages crossing until there was no dividing line. Our languages might carry their cadence, our myths might echo their gods. Even our DNA could bear their imprint, silent traces of a civilization that shaped who we are. Culture, too, would look different. The sea, not the land, would be the center of our world, our temples and cities, built in harmony with the tides. Crystals, not coins, might be the measure of wealth. Astronomy, not conquest, the highest pursuit of the mind. Time itself might have been measured, not by kings and wars, but by the movement of stars. Pause and imagine a planet where every shore carried the same symbols, every people spoke variations of the same tongue, every culture bowed to the same ancient memory. And in that world, there would be no us and them. There would be only Atlantis. For centuries, Atlantis has lived more in legend than in science. No archaeologist has uncovered absolute proof of its existence. Yet, scattered across the globe are discoveries that keep the mystery alive, hinting that the story Plato told may not have been entirely fiction. One of the most famous examples is the Bimini Road in the Bahamas. Beneath the shallow waters lies a formation of massive stone blocks, arranged in a way that some believe could be the remains of an ancient seawall or roadway. While skeptics argue it is a natural formation, others see in it the outline of a sunken settlement, a fragment of a city the sea once swallowed. Another clue appears in the Piri Reis map, drawn in the 16th century. The map seems to depict parts of Antarctica before it was covered in ice, raising questions about the source of such advanced geographic knowledge. Could it have been copied from records preserved by a seafaring civilization, long forgotten? The island of Santorini in Greece offers yet another connection. Around 1600 before Christ, a massive volcanic eruption destroyed the thriving Minoan culture there. Entire towns were buried in ash, their ruins preserved beneath layers of stone. To some historians, this catastrophe, with its sudden floods and devastation, feels uncannily like the memory of Atlantis collapsing into the sea. And the hints do not end there. In 2001, sonar scans off the coast of Cuba revealed strange underwater formations, pyramid-like structures, and grids resembling roads. Imagine pyramids rising in silence beneath the waves, their steps concealed by centuries of silt. Similarly, off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument juts upward from the seafloor, its terraces and stairways leading down into the deep, as if once carved for a people who lived where the ocean now lies. None of these findings prove Atlantis beyond doubt. Yet, together, they suggest that the memory of a powerful seafaring civilization may be rooted in reality. Perhaps Atlantis was not a myth invented by Plato, but a world the ocean consumed, remembered only in fragments, scattered across the seas, like the broken memory of a city the water never fully forgot. If Atlantis had never sunk, the story of our world would not revolve around Egypt, Greece, Rome, or even the United States. It would revolve around the empire that ruled the seas, the civilization whose shadow stretched across every continent. Atlantis. And that warning is as urgent now as ever. We live in an age of rising seas, shifting climates, and fragile systems that seem eternal until the moment they fail. Atlantis may be a myth, but its fate mirrors the destiny of every empire. Survival rests not only on strength, but on humility and foresight. So the question lingers: did Atlantis vanish long ago, or does it still live in ways we have not uncovered? Perhaps history is not what we think. Perhaps the ruins of Atlantis are not lost at all, but lie hidden beneath our feet, the ground itself whispering of a world the ocean once claimed. If Atlantis never sank, history would not be ours, it would be theirs. Or maybe, just maybe, Atlantis never sank at all. Maybe we are standing on its ruins. If this journey carried you towards sleep, join us again for the next one. Subscribe, and let these stories of hidden history guide you through the night. Atlantis may fade, but the mysteries remain. Good night.